Just let it roll for a sec. Welcome to Imaging Success with Jeff Rubinoff, Vice President of the iRad Sales Group. Today, we are here with Pat Gunn, Executive Channel Manager for Medicatech, a US-based manufacturer for X-ray equipment. Today, we're going to be talking about X-ray. How do we compare and contrast the different systems and options? How are you doing today, Pat?
Oh, not bad. Yourself, Jeff?
Doing great. Looking forward to having this chat with you. Tell us a little bit about your position with Medicatech.
Well, my title is Executive Channel Manager. Basically, Medicatech is a manufacturer. We don't sell direct to the public. We sell through companies like yours, and I support the network of dealers that sell our product. That's my basic job, is to make sure you guys are happy and to make sure the customer ultimately is happy. And I provide applications training, and I also provide advice if I see a bad technique being done by the X-ray tech, as well as other things. That's basically my overall job, is to support you guys.
That's awesome. So you might be a little bit unique than some of the others that are involved in the X-ray world, but you were actually an RT and working in clinic, in hospitals. How has being an RT really helped you support your customers?
Well, it's helped me immensely because, for one, I can look at an X-ray and tell what they're doing wrong if they're, not getting a good X-ray. I had 20 years in the hospitals up north, and that's just brought a wealth of knowledge as far as how to get a good radiograph. And unfortunately, in a lot of states, there's not a lot of requirements to shoot X-rays. Like some of the states, you do have to be ARRT registered, and you have to go to a 3-year course, whereas some states, there's no requirement at all. So they'll lean very heavily on my X-ray experience, because sometimes their X-ray techs are, not nowhere near as experienced as others. So it's very varied in the field. And being an RT, I can offer them advice. I can, kind of hold their hand until they get a little better at taking pictures.
Interesting. So as we get into X-ray, obviously there's different components to the X-ray, from a generator to the flat panel to the X-ray tube. So there's multiple different components. Let's go through them one by one. Let's start with the generator. And then we can get into tubes and detectors. But there's different size generators, and I think it can be sometimes confusing for a customer to really determine if they're getting value or if they're getting the right system for what their particular needs are. What are the different ranges of generators that are out there?
Okay, well, they start off really small in the mobile imaging market, because you have to be able to take the machine and load it into a van, and then you have to drag it into, say, a nursing home, and you have to bring it to the bedside. So they have to be made light, and they can go as low as 2.4 kilowatt. And they serve their purposes well for doing chest x-rays, but they struggle when you get to the larger body parts, like, for instance, a lumbar spine. But, portable x-ray is going to have its limitations. Then when you jump to your regular x-ray systems, they start off at 20 kilowatts generally. And I don't recommend 20 kilowatt generators, because they're very underpowered for a full x-ray department. The reason people buy them is they're a little less expensive. And if you're a specialty group that's say you're just doing chest x-rays, you can get away with a 20 kilowatt generator. But to me, the minimum that any place should have in the modern day is a 30 kilowatt. And it's 1.5 times more powerful than 20 kilowatt. And you're going to see a big difference when you get a heavy set patient who needs lower back x-rays. So while there is 20 kilowatts, I don't recommend them unless you have a specialized need. I suggest you go with at least a 30 kilowatt. The difference in the higher ones, when after the 30 kilowatt, they generally jump up to a 40 kilowatt. It gives you even more power, and it gives you a higher MA station. A higher MA station allows you to get a quicker exposure. So yes, a 40 kilowatt is better than a 30 kilowatt, but there is a price difference. People always, got to weigh their budget versus what equipment they're going to buy. After the 40 kilowatt, generators jump up to 50 kilowatt, 65, and even 80 kilowatt. Those require special power requirements. You have to have what they call three-phase power, and most places don't have that. Usually the only places I see three-phase power is in a dedicated radiology clinic or in the hospital market. And you need the three-phase power for the higher generators. 50 kilowatt and above will not run on single phase. So there's also electrical requirements with them. And the reason the hospitals want them is the higher power generators, of course, you can get through to 300-400 pound patients, where you probably won't with the 30 and 40 kilowatt. Plus, they're more robust. They're made to, hospitals go 24/7. They're shooting x-rays, maybe 100 patients a day in some hospitals, and they just want the best generator they can get their hands on. Do you need a 50 kilowatt in a walk-in clinic? No, you don't. But would it be nice to have? Yes, of course. You always want the best. But like I said, budget and needs are going to come into the factor of what you buy.
So sometimes it can be confusing a little bit, but the generator is the power that powers your X-ray, correct? And
Correct.
so that's a separate unit. And if you were to go into like the traditional standard urgent care environment, would you say 30 or 42?
I would say the 30. I would say the 30 is sufficient for your standard walk-in clinics. That's what I'd say 80% of them buy. If it's a higher end clinic and they can spend a couple of bucks more, then, I always show them the 40 kilowatt option as well. And I explain to them, it's nice when you have a pediatric patient, because you can get like 1/64th of a second exposure with the 40 kilowatt, where you might only be able to get 1/16th of a second with the 30 kilowatt, because you have the higher MA station. It's also a little bit more robust as well. But like I said, it's a budget dictates a lot of the times, and most of the time they go with the 30, or there's also a 32 kilowatt, depending on the brand. They're either 30 or 32 kilowatt.
And one of the more well-known names is what, CPI? That's one of
Yeah,
the
CPI is the generator we sell. It comes out of Canada. It's extremely reliable. It's known to be one of the best generators that there are. And the one we sell the most is the 32 kilowatt and the 40 kilowatt. We do sell the 50 and the 65. And then they also have generators that have fluoro capabilities, which is like if you've ever heard of a barium enema or an upper GI, they need to see motion in the X-ray. So those are specialized generators, and those you'll only generally see in the hospital or dedicated radiology clinics.
That's interesting. So, all right. So the generator, obviously important to get the right amount of power. Then there's other components that are critical as well. X-ray tube can be a factor, right? And then the detector. But when we get into the detector, that is could cause a little bit of confusion. I think in the old days in the X-ray world, people were used to having film and chemicals, and maybe the majority of them pretty much processed very similar. um, then they went into what was called CR. Now we're in DR, which is all digital, but not all digital is equal, right? And there's different types. Can you reference, maybe let's start there. What are some of the different varieties of DR, like the cesium and the Gadox, and what does that really mean?
Okay, well, basically, your X-ray detectors, you have three different kinds, and one kind is really not even used anymore. You had the CCD cameras, which were um, right now nobody's really buying them anymore. CCD is like the same kind of chip you see in a camera, and they put a bunch of them in detectors, and The problem is they were round, and if you've got 170 round detectors, then all around the edges you're missing information. Plus, they weren't efficient. They were actually less efficient than film. So you had to use more radiation than coming from film. So if you ask me, that's moving backwards. But people bought them because DR in the beginning was super expensive. Now it's come down to where nobody even buys the CCD technology anymore. They all go with what they call flat panel detectors. Now, in the flat panel detectors, there's two different kinds. There's the older technology, which is called gadolinium, and there's the newer technology, which is called cesium. That's the scintillator. That's the part of the detector that's called the scintillator, and that's what the X-ray photon actually hits. And then you also have the TFT, the thin film transistor part, which is the electronics of the system. So you have your scintillator and your TFT electronics. The gadolinium is an older technology, and it was pretty much about the same efficiency as the CRs were. CRs were digital, a whole nother different kind. No one's buying them anymore, so we won't talk about them too much. But they were actually also about a little less efficient than film. But it was quick. You shoot a picture and you were looking at an X-ray 5 seconds later, and it took off, even though they were really expensive, people were buying them. Now the next generation is the cesium detectors, and the cesium is a lot more efficient than the gadolinium. If they don't give speeds to DR, but just for our purposes, just to give a little picture, film was basically 400 speed. The higher the speed, the more efficient. They had 600 speed film, but if you used it, you didn't get as good image quality. So most people were using 400 speed because it was the happy medium. Gadolinium DR panels were probably somewhere around 350 speed. You had to use a little bit more than film. Whereas I would say a good, and I'm going to explain what I mean by a good cesium panel in a minute. A good top of the line cesium panel is probably more like 600, and then they have really premium panels that would be like probably 800 speed, which means you're probably going to use up to half of what you used with film. And now I'll digress, and I'll explain what I meant by a good cesium panel. There's a lot of manufacturers. I'm not going to mention any names. I don't, like to downgrade anybody's product, but there's manufacturers who have made the layer of cesium thinner because it saves money. It's easier to produce, and the problem is the thinner the layer, the less effective it is. You basically have cesium panels. If you get a really low-end cesium panel, there's gadolinium panels that are really high-end from the best manufacturers. They're actually better than the low-end cesium panel. Just because the material is cesium doesn't mean it's a good panel. So you want to make sure that you're getting a panel that has that is efficient, has a good cesium layer, and is going to give you a good picture. So, like I said, not all cesium is created equal. Would be the best.
So then it's from a durability perspective as well, right? If you have a thinner layer of cesium, do you have a life expectancy?
It's also going to be more fragile if it's thinner. But to that point, more important is the casing, and that's another way the low-end manufacturers save money. There's manufacturers that are taking old CR cassette housings and modifying them to hold their DR electronics and the scintillator inside. And it's a cheap way out. The really good manufacturers use carbon fiber because carbon fiber, for one, is light, it's strong, and they also put crumple zones in the corners so that if you do drop it, it keeps it from breaking. There's other differences, but you can tell. I mean, the best way to tell a great panel is to have it in your X-ray room and shoot pictures, but ultimately not everybody's going to have that ability. But a cheap panel, when you pick it up, for one, it's super heavy because they don't use good materials in the casing. And, right there you can say, all right, this is not a high quality panel because you can see it. It's made out of steel. instead of carbon fiber. So there are ways to tell a good panel. The average layman's not going to know. I think people, instead of worrying about the price so much, they need to worry about the quality, the reputation of the product. Is it out there? How many installations do you have? There's a lot of fly-by-night products out there, and sometimes save $1,000 up front, cost you $20,000 down the line. Plus, you're not getting good image quality, and ultimately, that's, to me, the most important thing is good image quality and low dose.
That's key. So those are two important criteria that you brought up. Image quality obviously is the outcome, but then radiation dose. Uh, it's going to be important on exposure to the patient. Fortunately, in the X-ray world, most of the X-ray operators are outside of the room, so they're outside of the cone or the beam. So they're not as exposed to radiation as much. Let's talk a little bit about the X-ray tube, and then maybe you can talk and add some additional, what are some of the other important components that we should be looking out for in an X-ray? First starting with the X-ray tube, because that'd be the next step. Does that lend any significance to performance overall?
Yes, and there's two things to consider with the X-ray tube. One is, and they're rated in thousands of heat units or KHU, and generally, if you're buying your regular X-ray room, you start out, like a 30 kilowatt generator. You're going to pair it with a 140 KHU 1,000 heat unit tube. They have higher. They have 200,000 heat units. They have 300,000 heat units. What that equates to is how fast you can continue to shoot X-rays without the tube overheating. A lower heat unit tube, if you shoot a really high X-ray exposure, it makes you wait a certain amount of time before you can shoot again. And
Right.
with the higher heat unit, you can shoot faster. So generally in the hospital market, they'll use 300 heat units because they're shooting fast and all day long, and they're doing a lot of big patients. So,
Right.
the heat units is one factor. And then the other factor of the tube is they all have a small and a large focal spot. They have what they call the fractional focal spot tubes. Those are better. They get a little bit sharper image. So in other words, like in a regular tube, you may have a 1 millimeter small focal spot and a 2 millimeter or 3 millimeter large focal spot. In a fractional, it would be like a 1.2 and a 3.6 or whatever. The fractionals are a little better. They cost a little more, but they're better. So higher heat unit and fractional focal spots are your best,
So in some of these cheap rooms, then what they're probably doing, which is bad for the consumer, for the end customer, because they're going to get less efficiency and poorer quality image, but they'll probably go with a smaller heat unit tube, right? So the tube won't have the capacity. They might sacrifice on the brand of the generator, even though they might go with a 30 kilowatt generator or something. Maybe they'll go with one that's not as efficient, but then the tube can't necessarily handle, but then the detector. I mean, that this seems like it's kind of like the perfect trifecta. You have to pair all three of these the right way. Kind of like if you're taking, if you're in photography, having a quality camera, but then understanding how to use the camera. A
well,
professional photographer could use their cell phone or a cheap camera, but the outcome won't be as great as if they had a professional camera, and understanding how to use it. And in this scenario, it seems like there's a lot more to it because you're also exposing the patient to radiation. You want good image quality. Uh, what's your feedback on that?
yeah, well, I mean, if you have a 30 kilowatt and a 140 tube, that's perfectly fine. I mean, it's not that you're undercutting, but there's options that are better, is what I'm pointing out. But I think the most important part is the detector, because I would rather have a high end cesium detector with a 30 kilowatt generator than a crappy cesium or a gadolinium panel with a 40 kilowatt. You're going to get a better
Right.
picture with the higher end detector.
Okay.
So the detector is probably the most important part. I mean, as long as you have at least a 30 kilowatt, and There's also the old generators that were standard frequency. They're nowhere near as good as the new generators, the high frequency generators. A 30 kilowatt standard frequency is nowhere near as powerful as a 30 kilowatt high frequency. And it's just a difference in the X-ray beam. And I don't want to go too heavy into physics, but not all 30 kilowatt generators are, something that's 20 years old and a standard frequency. Even if it's a 40 kilowatt, I'd rather have a new 30 kilowatt high frequency. So there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle. I'm hoping I'm not confusing people, but that's the reason that you want to make sure you buy from someone who actually understands all of this. There's a lot of people, there's salespeople out there, and I talk to them, and they have absolutely no idea about an X-ray department, but yet they're out there selling equipment. And all they know is, I have the cheapest stuff, and that's how they sell. And that's, Mr. Consumer, beware. If you ask questions and all their answers are, I'll get back to you on that, I'll get back to you on that, I'll get back, they probably don't know what they're selling you. I don't try to sell the customer the cheapest solution. I try to sell them the solution that's going to work for their needs. That's what's more important. If it costs $1,000 more, so be it. You're going to live with this equipment for 20, 30 years.
That's a great point. If you go with cheap, it's gonna be less efficient, and there's a high probability chance you'll end up replacing components of it. It's not gonna have the longevity. And you're right. X-ray typically stays in an office 20, 25 years. It goes to the next generation, whoever owns the office after, and they get so much use out of it. That's why we're still seeing in some, rare scenarios where people are still using film. And that's
Yeah.
because their hardware has been around for that long and it's that efficient, even though film is not as efficient, but the hardware itself has been. So let's talk a little bit about software, because there's different types of software. You have the acquisition software, you have packs. We won't get into a full conversation of packs. However, I know with your software, you have both the acquisition and a mini packs to help store. But let's talk a little bit about acquisition software, and does that impact how people are using their systems? Does that improve on workflow, the speed of acquisition, or is it more in line with really assisting and helping the RT get the best outcome? How would you get into software and explain that part of it?
Well, actually, the answer to everything you just said is yes, and I'll go through it one at a time.
Okay.
For one, the GUI, or graphic user interface, of the software is extremely important. A lot of places have a lot of part-time technologists or people that are not there every day. And, if it's difficult to learn the software, they're going to make mistakes. The other thing is, the software is a large part of the image quality. I've seen cheap, let's go back to the cheap, crappy cesium panels. I've seen them with excellent software that have every digital image, you have an algorithm to give you the best possible image. And sometimes pairing a really crappy panel with the best softwares can still give you a pretty decent image. All right. So the software algorithms come into play big time with the image. Our software, we own it. We have our own programmers, and we've got really excellent algorithms. But I've seen other companies that also have excellent algorithms, and they get it. It's a big part of the image quality. I've seen really good panels that I know are good panels with good when they have good software on it. But I've seen it. And I'm not going to mention any company names, but I've seen a really good panel with what I consider a crappy software, and their algorithms were horrible, and the image quality wasn't that good. So user interface is important. Algorithms are important. Customizability is important. And then also there's requirements by the states. Like, for instance, we have what they call a repeat reject analysis built into our software. I've seen companies that don't have that. There's certain states where they won't buy their software because it's required by the state. If a tech repeats an X-ray, he has to tell them, why did I do it? And then they keep percentages of repeats. And it's all about teaching the X-ray tech. You know, hey, we looked over your repeat reject, and it seems that 30% of your X-rays are overexposed. We're going to have you work with, you know, one of the senior techs on technique, because you're overexposing 30% of your patients, and you know you can get a better picture with less radiation. So a lot of states, and the states that aren't doing it, I'm sure in the future probably will. So there's certain integral parts of the software as well that you need to have. As far as the PACS software, we include what we call a mini PACS. PACS can be from a mini PACS where it's on your network, and you know we give you so many licenses, and the doctors don't have to go in the X-ray room; they can view from their office. So that's just a little mini PACS, which we don't even charge for. Can go up to $1 million hospital PACS systems. So it's very, very varied. You know, I don't want to get too deep into it, but basically what PACS is, PACS. PA is picture archive, so it archives your images, it stores your images. And the CS is communication system. It allows you to view those images from other places besides the X-ray room. Now, you know, you can have a PACS system that 17 hospitals are hooked up to, and doctors want to view from their homes and all. They can be very elaborate. They can cost millions of dollars. And then you can have what they call the mini PACS, which is what 90% of your walk-in clinics and orthopedic clinics and chiropractors, veterinarians, all your small offices, they shoot their own X-rays, generally want to have some kind of mini PACS. Then they have what they call cloud PACS, which is basically cloud means that it's not software based. What it is you have 3 or 4 different sites that back up the images. The person sends them through the internet to these sites, and then they can view them anywhere. Anything that you can pick up your phone, and you have internet access on your phone, and you can, you know, log into your account and look at your images while you're eating dinner. So it's really nice. But the other thing that it also, that I think is the best part of cloud PACS, and I'm gonna give you the pluses and minuses of both, but cloud PACS offers disaster recovery. You know, most of your computers, you can put an external hard drive, you can have it backed up to another computer in the clinic. But if there's a fire in the clinic or a flood, or people rob computers, you lose everything. With this, generally, most people are using Amazon as their host for these cloud PACS systems. And you develop your own software, and you pay Amazon a fee to back up the images. And they back it up at 3, sites that have certain requirements, and you're never losing this information. It's guaranteed.
Essentially, then you get redundant backup, and
It's
so
redundant. Yeah, it's redundant, and
protecting, and then you have to hold images for what, 7 years?
it depends on the state. Most states require that you hold images for 7 years. It also depends on the field. Like in the veterinary world, they don't have to do anything. They don't even need FDA approval on their machine. But in the medical society, which is 99% of our business, most states require at least 5 years, and up to 7 years, you have to keep your patient's charts. Now, the plus I see in your regular PACS is they can have extremely efficient tool set, all kinds of measurement tools, things that measure the heart, measure the spine, angles, you name it. They have tools for it. Cloud, since it's going to live in the cloud and you're not installing any software, it's going to be much more basic. You're going to be able to zoom your image. You're going to be able to lighten it and darken it. You'll have a few measurement tools, but you're not going to have the kind. So a lot of my customers, even though they have the cloud, they still use the mini PACS because of the tools. We have like 50 different tools on there. So this plus is
Interesting. That's a really good point. So that actually then enters into the overall workflow. So if you're doing acquisition, you also want to have some tools, right, during
yeah, we
acquisition.
have everything that's on our. One of the really nice things, and I've worked for other companies, is you have what they call the acquisition software, which is what takes the X-ray, and then you have your PACS software. We've put them both on the same computer, and it saves money as opposed to having 2 different computers. We can do it on separate computers if people request it, but it's all on one computer. But our PAC software looks exactly like our acquisition. There's not two different graphic user interfaces, which is nice. The tech only has to learn one software. The only difference between the PAC software and the acquisition is in the acquisition, you have the man where you pick your body parts, you're telling it the algorithms to apply. You don't need that in the PAC software because you're not shooting x-rays from it, from your viewing stations around the office. So we took that out. But the tool set is exactly the same in the acquisition. Some doctors do their measurements right there if they shoot their own x-rays. Some doctors shoot their own x-rays, like chiropractors usually shoot their own. They'll do their markups and their angles and their measurements right there on the acquisition station. And then they can see it later in their office when at the end you hit done and it sends it to the PAC software. So it's kind of nice that you don't have to learn two different softwares. Most companies have two different softwares because they don't own both. We own both our softwares, so we developed them to be exactly the same.
That's awesome. What would you have as some closing remarks on X-ray? Something that we haven't covered that they'll.
Like I said, if you're looking to buy an X-ray system, make sure you're talking to someone who's knowledgeable about them. It's really nice if they have an RT next to their name because if you've shot X-rays, then you know about the system. And like I said, not all RTs are created equal. There's states, I'm not going to mention the states, but there's states where anybody can walk into an X-ray room and shoot X-rays. They have zero requirements, which to me is scary. I don't want to be X-rayed by someone like that. We all know that X-ray is not, it can be dangerous in the wrong hands. But my advice would be to make sure that you're talking to someone who's knowledgeable about X-ray rooms. And if a person's not asking you what your workflow is, then they're not going to pick the right product for you. Some guys just want to come in and say, hey, look, I got the cheapest DR panel and this. And they didn't even bother to ask you, what kind of x-rays do you do? How many do you do a day? This is what a person who's knowledgeable in selling x-ray equipment should be asking you.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Pat. It's always a pleasure. And thank you for joining us here. This is Jeff with the iRad Sales Group, and this is our video series, Imaging Success Lessons with Experts. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you, Pat.
Thanks, Jeff.